Okay, so I'm Associate Professor Kerry Chappell. I know many of the familiar faces in the room, so welcome to colleagues and friends. I'm one of the co-conveners of the BERA, that's the British Educational Research Association Creativity SIG. I have with me today my as well colleague Joe Trousdale, who's also an Associate Professor at University of Sussex. And I also would just like to name check our other co-convener, Victoria Kinsella, who's a reader at Birmingham City University, but Victoria is currently on maternity leave at the moment. So just kind of background hello to Victoria. So we are the co-conveners of the BERA Creativity SIG, and we have been co-organising this event for you on creative pedagogies today. I want to say a big thank you to BERA for hosting the event online. There's all sorts of things that go on behind the scenes, managing registrations, organising recordings, etc., advertising. So thank you to BERA, who are our main host of the event today. As you know, we're here to talk about creative pedagogies. This is one in quite a long series of events that Joe, Victoria and I have been organising on behalf of the Creativity SIG for BERA over the last 5 or so years. Around 2021, we created a provocation document on what the creativities in education, research and practice field might need to be doing, what it had been doing and what it might need to do next. And picking up on these strands, we worked on methodology as one strand for a seminar, and now creative pedagogies has really come into the sort of forefront, into the lens, the spotlight for this event. So that's the core focus for today, as you know. We're really delighted that we've got some international creativities in education experts with us today. We have 3 different conversations. Those are going to be live conversations that we work through with those colleagues. There's 2 individuals in conversation with BERA colleagues, and there's 1 group of 3 from the US who are going to also bring a lively contribution to the event, I know. So welcome to all of our speakers, our experts. We'll introduce those experts individually as we work through the programme. So the other element of the event today that I wanted to just acknowledge is our international co-host. For a long time now, the BERA Creativity SIG has been hosting events like this, but very much in a kind of UK setting, dominantly UK setting. So we've been really delighted this time round to be able to co-advertise, co-host the event with colleagues from the International Society for the Study of Creativity and Innovation and the Global Institute of Creative Thinking. So thank you to those colleagues who have helped us to disseminate and bring colleagues in from their constituencies as well. Also, just a thank you to Zoe Lewis and Pam Bernard, who are BERA members who've taken a really central role in organising this event and making those connections, particularly in Pam's case with those international organisations. So thank you to both Zoe and Pam as well. I'm just going to take you through, before we start those conversations, into the running order, how we're going to run things. So the first in conversation will be next. We'll start with the in conversations. We'll run through the 3 in conversations, but then we will go into breakout rooms because we really want people to have the opportunity to debate a couple of the questions that each of the key speakers will be addressing. So we will, once we've gone into the breakout rooms, we will come out again and Joe and Zoe will run the plenary to bring through the ideas that have come through in those facilitated breakout rooms. We'll then take a short break at 5:30, and at 5:45, as ever with this BERA Creativity SIG annual event, we then go into the Anna Craft Memorial Lecture, which is co-hosted by the universities of Exeter and Open University, and that will run until about 6:30 or 18:45 UK time, when the event will finish. So I am now hopefully going to kick us off by stepping into the arena with Professor Dan Harris. Dan, are you there? Okay, this is a slight problem. So I think I'm going to step back from the conversation with Dan, and I'm going to hand to Joe Trousdale and Sarah Childs to go for their conversation, sorry. And we'll try and chase up Dan in the background while they're speaking. Over to you, Joe and Sarah.
Okay. Thank you, Kerry. Sarah, are you ready?
I think so. We're there, Joe.
Fantastic. Well, I have the absolute delight then of starting our event in conversation with Sarah. Sarah is the lead practitioner for the Penryn Creative Collaboratives and is going to talk to us a little bit about her perspective in that. But I should just say a little bit about Sarah and what that means beyond the UK. So the Creativity Collaboratives are one of 8 in the UK. These are sort of centrally funded. They have also been inspired by the publication of the Durham Creativity Report, which also builds on the history and the background in the UK of the development of creativity in education, which we were interested in for quite some time and which has a slightly different face at the moment. So this is one of the funded projects which is looking at that relationship between how we realise that on the ground and how we do that as both a practice and a research
because I was her moderator, so that was quite nice for her to say that that's kind of thrown into the role.
Thank you. So I should just say something about Sarah. She's going to talk more fully about her position, but I thought it might be an interesting way into our first question to say that Sarah's had the advantage of a role with the Penryn Collective, working across the schools for a number of years, and she's done that from the perspective of as an arts specialist. She works from early years up to Key Stage 4, so she's a practitioner on the ground, but she's also someone as a teacher educator and a kind of an advocate for this research artist base. I wondered whether one of the interesting things in terms of your perspective on the creative pedagogies, Sarah, whether the way in which you came from an arts background was a challenge to the kind of focus of your collective across the curriculum.
Thanks, Joe. Nice to see everyone. There's lots of familiar names on the call, which is really special. So thank you. Yes, so my role here is lead for the Penryn Creativity Collaboratives, which is a funded project by Arts Council England. And so my role here as a classroom teacher at Penryn College is I teach, and I teach music from early years, so 4-year-olds all the way up to 16, which is our school down here in Penryn. Penryn is down in the southwest end of England, if you're not familiar with this area, and we're right down the end of England in Cornwall. And our partnership, so our Penryn partnership, which is part of the Collaboratives project, I've worked with for nearly over 20 years. We are a collection of 1 secondary school, so we have children from 11 to 16. And then historically, what were our 8 feeder primary schools? So the primary schools which would send us our children at transition when they reached the age of 11. So the role in terms of the partnership for me has always been working really closely with those classroom teachers, particularly developing music curriculum, which is where I had that relationship with not just the teachers, but the head teachers previously. Has it helped our work for the Penryn Creativity Collaboratives? I would say absolutely. Very fortunate to be always warmly welcomed into lots of neighbouring schools, and I think that's allowed us to thrive. It also means we have a really good understanding of each other in terms of the way we develop practice in our classrooms and how we work across our communities. So I'd say that's had a big impact, Joe.
But the focus of your collective isn't certainly about the arts, is it? So I wonder if you would just say something about that then.
They are, each of the pilots for the Creativity Collaboratives has their own research questions. So ours down here in Penryn is how does teaching for creativity across the curriculum lead to young people who are better prepared for a modern workforce? So that for us stemmed from classroom practice that was going on here at Penryn College. We have a STEAM faculty, so we're not STEM, we're STEAM, and that's always been interlinked for about the last 3 or 4 years with industry partners. And so we started to work with our local partners, and we very much kept our local context through our Creativity Collaborative journey. And they started to say to us, look, You know, what is it that we need looking forward for our children into that modern workforce, whatever that modern workforce might be. And so interestingly for us, no, our collaborative is not about the arts. We're very much looking at the role of creative skills across the curriculum.
And that it's interesting that partnership pre-existed this project happening. And I just wonder, were the conversations previously described in ways that you might consider creative? Has the discourse changed, or was it already characterized in that way?
It's interesting. Our work across the partnership has always been quite mixed and varied, and it's very much about ensuring a really broad and exciting opportunity for all of our children, whether they're 4-year-olds or 16-year-olds. I wouldn't necessarily say historically our conversations were around creative pedagogies. We weren't talking about skills for workforce readiness. That wasn't something that we'd started. However, we were talking about curriculum. We were talking about how we ensure really good enriched curriculum for our learners, and we knew from both primary and secondary, we knew that we were already on the right path when the Creativity Collaboratives work came along. And I can remember when the Durham Commission published its first report, it really resonated with us here, and it really kind of made us go, right, this is what we want to talk about, and not just for our children but also for the context of Cornwall and that locality that we serve.
So what can I ask, what resonated? You know, what was it there that chimed, that made you think actually what we've been talking about is really about creative skills?
I guess for our young people, it's starting to consider what they want to do moving forward. And we know for lots of our young people, and Cornwall is a very mixed demographic. It's an interesting area to be. And we have, you know, a lot of children who might not travel far for their workforce. And therefore, we started to realise and started to know from our industry partners that skill set was increasingly changing. And our industry partners were starting to come to us and go, well, actually, this knowledge is really important, but what about this skill, and how can we develop our work together to encourage children to be able to talk better, collaborate better, be ready to talk about developing ideas and being more innovative. And Cornwall's got quite a rich history for that, and the creative industries are a good example of that in Cornwall as they continue to really blossom and grow at this current moment.
So do you think it's the fact that there are a number of creative industries? You mentioned in the report the fact that there are so many small industries in the area that you're in, and we talked about the similarity between the Suffolk region that I'm in and that you're in, that in some ways there are connections there, strong agricultural framework, a lot of small. Does it matter, do you think, in terms of, you know, other people learning from your work about this focus upon the readiness for the workforce through creative skills?
I think a lot of what we would find in here in Cornwall would mirror a lot of what the rest of us will know, not just in England, but across the world, I guess. You know, Cornwall has a history in agriculture, in fishing, and, you know, for forestry, for example. But increasingly, and what we started to hear from our industry partners, was there is a need for adaptability, and the fact that technology was starting to make a real change in what was happening. We've also started to see more of our young people go into apprenticeships. Lots of young people at 16 not necessarily following that pathway into perhaps A-levels, post-16 study, actually going into an industry context and learning in that role as they go. So a lot of our industry partners are increasingly offering more apprenticeship pathways as well. And that was part of our work last year when we started to do the research, was actually where do our children go? What do they do? And do they stay there when they get there? Those kind of conversations.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about the skills then, about, you know, what your own kind of, you know, as a collective, your perspective on creative pedagogies.
So part of the work for the Creativity Collaboratives for all of the 8 pilots is that we have a research partner. So us last year, our research partner, we're really fortunate to be working with the University of Exeter, working with Ursula Crickmay and Kerry Chappell. And we spent last year, which was year 1 for us, considering what do we know already. And that involved a literature review. It involved some focus groups with students and young people. It was an opportunity for us to take stock of what do we know already? What do our leaders think? What do our staff think? What do we know? What's going on in our classrooms? And it led to, actually quite rapidly, we knew we needed to define creativity for our partnership. We knew we needed a summary of what those skills might look like, and equally what that might start to therefore be in the classroom moving forward. So I wonder whether it'd be useful, Joe, if I share what those skills came out from all of that research.
Great, yeah.
So you can find all of these if you're interested in a bit more detail through our Year 1 report. Which can be found on our website, which I'll put the link in a minute. Joe, have I picked up a lovely echo?
I can't hear one, Sarah. It's clear for me.
That's okay. Just my end, that's fine. So we felt across the Penryn Creative Collaborative that there were
key areas. I think we can hear an echo. There's quite a bad echo.
Oh.
Can everybody
talk it through? I joked earlier that my love of technology is limited. Is that better?
No.
Oh.
I don't think it's to do with the PowerPoint. I think it's to do with an echo coming from other mics on. Okay. Thank you.
Joe, if you mute, does it stop? Is that better, everybody? Oh, I've not got an echo. I might even try and experiment with file sharing one more time then, everyone. So we felt our creative skills came into 5 key areas. And as you'll see in the graphic here, that they get broken down as well. So our 5 key creative skills were dialogue and collaboration, generating new ideas that matter, honing and developing an idea, and being imaginative and playful, and empowered action. Interestingly, through the process of last year, some of the language changed in this, and we spent quite a lot of time unpicking what that might look like. And as I might talk a little bit later about what we're doing currently, you can see we're still on the journey of making sure we understand that. For us, no one skill is more important. These are very much as they are because we feel at the moment they all have equal importance. And this is us across the curriculum as well, which I think is really important. When we talk about dialogue and collaboration, we're considering questions, how we pose questions, how students ask questions, how we solve and how we find problems, how our young people might work, not just individually, but collaboratively and within that community for them. We also then felt that within that there should be something around negotiating difference. How do we, for our young people, develop that skill of being able to have a conversation with somebody and perhaps you have different opinions, and how you then develop that conversation through dialogue. For honing and developing an idea, we've included 3 main threads in that. One was reflection, the others around understanding rules and consequences, and then that need to be persistent when you're doing it. And that started to stem from some of the work that we've been seeing in areas across school, both in primary and secondary. And these are notions that some of our teachers have taken on board in their action research this year. Empowered action kind of changed over time for us. Originally, when we started our research last year, we couldn't settle on the language. And essentially, this is around student agency and how our young people are really at the forefront of their creative action. So for us, that is around risk taking, that's around immersion, and that real ownership that we want our young people to demonstrate. Being imaginative and playful, quite unsurprisingly for a lot of our colleagues, was what they expected to see when we talked about creative skills, that inclusion around play, imagination, and considering possibilities. But we as a collaborative are from 4-year-olds up to 16-year-olds. And it was interesting to start to hear how perhaps for some of our earliest colleagues working in kind of 4- or 5-year-old classrooms, for them, play absolutely was part of their bread and butter of what they were doing, but perhaps not so much for those teachers delivering classes to 14, 15 and 16-year-olds. And our last creative skill was innovation, considering ethical consequences and understanding diverse values, and really considering how those fit together and how that might start to look in the classroom. Joe, I'm going to unmute. I'm going to stop sharing in the hope that we can talk with no echo.
I don't know. Is the echo back? We might have to take it in turns if so. Okay. All right. So you've already taken us in, Sarah, to giving us, not just an insight into that, but also therefore a kind of sense of why those creative pedagogies matter. I wonder if you'd say a little bit from the point of view also of the the industry partners? Because I'm guessing, you know, one of the changes in your role has been not just to be working across the schools, but to be working also as the voice with other partners. We do a swap.
Yeah, the industry partners has just been a real delight of our work, actually, and we're very fortunate and really grateful for the time that they give, and that's for us local industry partners, but also our local cultural partners. Lots of our cultural partners we'd had worked with before, you know, signalling back to work, a lot of us did even over the last 10-15 years from creative partnerships. Our industry partners are perhaps newer. They were those traditional partners that perhaps, you know, work with us around careers, work experience for our children, perhaps when they're age 14, 15, but increasingly had started to play more of a role in curriculum development, working in our STEAM faculty. The messages we got from our industry partners at the start of our year one research was around that need for adaptability, around the need for students being able to really just be a bit more adaptable than perhaps they were coming into the workplace with in terms of when they were 16 and 18. You know, our industry partners wanted them to be able to work across the skills, be able to reflect, to develop ideas, to be able to work with other people, and almost be able to cope with whatever those future workplaces might change and develop into. You know, we knew there was quite a feeling about the workforce moving forward, that there is an uncertainty about it, you know, and I guess we would all agree with that. And that's no different in Cornwall to many other places in the UK, I'm sure. We created what we called our creativity network, which combined these industry and cultural partners, and they are really the ones responsible for keeping us a bit grounded on what workforce readiness needs to be and what it looks like, you know, because for us that is the nutshell of what we're looking at. You know, we're looking across the curriculum about how these creative skills are going to make our children more prepared for whatever that workforce might be.
Can I just ask, that sounds all kind of wonderful and ideal. I just want to, where are the points of tension? I mean, are there dimensions in which, you know, for example, your teachers kind of think, well, you know, our job isn't to, you know, make children workforce ready. That's the employer's job. We have a broader role in terms of education, or you know, actually, you know, a sort of sense that actually these agendas are not the central ones in education. Has that been characterized anything, and has thinking this through the lens of creativity been a way of brokering, or has it been a cause of conflict?
It's been utterly fascinating, if I'm honest, and I think what we discovered very early doors is there's an assumption when you talk creative skills that you're talking about the arts, and our data very quickly showed from staff that, you know, they were assuming that I was going to talk to them about music and art and that they should be in every lesson. By putting us very much centered around workforce readiness, the messages became quite different, because for us it's becoming about really good classroom practice. You know, this is about inspiring teaching and learning for the future. You know, for us this is about, you know, we should be preparing our young people to leave and to thrive, and whether, you know, we're teaching them in primary or secondary, our staff have that same ambition. So I guess a lot of the work we have been doing is around really understanding why these skills are so important, and that therefore, you know, the work we're doing now, we have intentionally, you know, started to build a movement of staff that are across the curriculum. We're looking and talking to science teachers, we're talking with early years practitioners. You know, we are developing a team of staff that don't necessarily fall within those creative subjects, and also linking them up with an industry partner, so there's a real double voice that's coming from the learning that they're happening.
So give us a sense of how that works then, Sarah. What does that look like on the ground?
So if year one was all about research, year two has been about action research. So we spent last year doing more kind of baselining. This year has been about classroom practice and developing practitioners, and we're still learning with them. And with the support of the University of Exeter, we have developed 14 staff who have just completed their first cycle of action research. That action research has allowed each member of staff to have their own research question, I can give you some examples in a minute if you'd like, and has engaged them in quite thoughtful, reflective practice, considering how not only their own practice is changing, but also the impact on the young people, alongside the fact that we really want them to be then that voice that helps us cascade and disseminate moving forward into next year, which will be year 3 for us in our journey. So if you take some examples, you know, we've got staff this year who have looked at how creative skills harness children's thinking around thinking like a scientist. We've had some consider how immersive experience really influence innovation in some of our teenagers. We've had some staff look at how the impact on writing when you have immersion, and does it impact their understanding and their imagination and their playfulness. And we've intentionally brought this team of action research staff together so they have that opportunity to develop each other's practice and sharing, but also for us to have a network that we will learn from moving forward. We've been really fortunate to then link those action research staff with an industry partner. So we've had some of our partners deliver CPD, which has just been incredible, which already has having quite a broader impact in terms of disseminating quite quickly. We've had some staff spend some time in the workplace. You know, for some of our staff, they come straight from university in that journey into teaching and may never have been in a working environment outside of education. So for them to go and spend some time really understanding, you know, what does it look like if you're developing an idea with somebody else in a shipyard? What does it look like if you want to design something in an engineering facility? And they're really important, because if our staff are going to then develop those skills and create that real world learning atmosphere in their classrooms, they want to come from a place where they have a real sense of knowledge and understanding.
There's a real sense of the significance of the connections, and what I've kind of in my work historically, this notion of an invited disturbance seems to be what's going on. You know, people are prepared to kind of take in someone who's going to have a different way of seeing, and who therefore might reframe, but also in so doing excite what's going on. You've described something that's incredibly sort of inspiring, and obviously, you know, in the context, you know, 14 staff isn't all your staff, but it's a really substantial number of staff to be able to move forward with. I'm wondering whether there's anything about your experience that might also be helpful for people who are listening, who don't have the fortune of either having your expertise, your passion, or the structure of a collective in this way, or the funding to do so. You know, what is there in your work that might offer a seed to them to be able to move forward? In other words, what does this mean going forward? Does it mean that actually, you know, to take this forward, we do need to look more at the structures and the setting of these cross-organisation, cross-disciplinary ways of working, which creative pedagogies can enable? Or do you think there is anything in the way of working that might also offer small seed ideas to those who aren't in your position?
That's a really good question, and there's a big bit of me that always felt from the beginning that the funding that's come with the project for us has just allowed our work to flourish. I would have hoped to some extent that this would have been us moving forward anyway, but this has just given it a scope that we never would have got anywhere near, you know, without the support of the Arts Council, which is wonderful. You know, we have in England, many would say, quite a congested curriculum. You know, we have pinch points in our curriculum where exams or standard assessments affect what staff and teachers feel they can do within their classrooms. For us, it's about looking for the things, the practice, those moments in our lessons which we can change that will develop and really flourish some of these skills. And therefore, some of those little things can make a massive difference. You know, for a lot of our staff this year, for example, that ability to allow time, to allow thinking to develop. And that's not slowing down the pace of the classroom by any means, but it's just rethinking it slightly. It's considering, you know, the impact that these skills can have on making knowledge that bit stickier. I always talk about knowledge needing to stick in classrooms. How can we make it stickier? Well, actually, sometimes that might come from greater opportunities to work with others, from greater opportunities to just play with some ideas and consider some possibilities. or pose questions in a different way. And that's for us why it comes from very much the heart of what just we want really good teaching and learning to look like across our schools. And I do think that's something we can share, not just locally, but nationally and wider, because this is about what good classroom practice, you know, we want to be moving forward.
That's really nice to hear, because I guess what I'm hearing really is in some ways it's simply about having the appetite for an invited disturbance and being able to find some framework to be reflective, to think in a kind of action research sort of way. Is that, yeah?
The action research has had such great impact, and I think it will do moving forward. Bit of an echo, Joe, sorry. Because this is about teachers now being able to talk to teachers about how their practice has changed. And with the support of the University of Exeter, it's meant the quality of that research is really well grounded. So we're talking about, you know, they analysed a lot, our staff have analysed data. They've really considered where the themes are, where their trends are, what is starting to change. So therefore, as we move forward into year 3 and we cascade that from one member of staff in a school to them sharing it across all the members of staff in their school, you know, the scaling up of what we're talking about gets really exciting moving into next year. For the young people, their reflections, their student voice from this year, we share, and we'll share that across schools. So that learning community that we've established between not just the 9 schools involved, but with our partners, starts to have a real momentum about it. And I think building the momentum to share the thinking is really exciting.
I realise I think we're in our last minute or so, Sarah, of time to talk. So, and I probably haven't asked the questions to enable you to say everything. I know we had a much richer conversation. So I think what I'm going to do is, you know, I feel I've got a clear message about both the why and how it's working for you, what your agendas are, and what the where the essence of that is in terms of anybody else picking it up. Is there anything that you feel you want to say in these last couple of minutes that you haven't had chance to communicate?
Oh, well, no, it's just an exciting journey we're on. And I know across the 8 national pilots for the Creativity Collaborative, there's so much sharing that's going on, and there's lots of ways I know colleagues can find that information. I'll put the link for all the Penryn specific stuff in the comments in a minute, but I know if you want to particularly look perhaps on the Creativity Exchange, there's more of a narrative about the work going on across the collaboratives. And I hope as we all move into our year 3 journey next year, that ability to share will just keep blossoming through next year. It's exciting times, and we hope that people can even just take the smallest little golden nugget about what we're doing and take it back to their own settings.
Well, I want to thank you, Sarah, for sharing so much information with us in such a short period of time, but also for inspiring us. And yes, to ask you, please, if you would, put those links in for Penryn particularly, but also more broadly for the creative collaboratives, because our international colleagues may not know about this and might want that broader picture as well. And just to say to colleagues that there will be opportunity to hear more from Sarah. Sarah will be facilitating one of our breakout groups in a bit, and hopefully we'll get a bit more of her perspective. But thank you so much, Sarah. It's been an absolute delight. And at this point, I'm going to pass over to Kerry and Dan.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Joe. Maybe just wait for you to mute. I think that's going to be the key going forwards. Everybody just keep muting yourself when you're not speaking. Thanks, Joe and Sarah. It's really great to get that insight, particularly into the British context right now. Welcome, Dan. Apologies for the technical hitch that meant we had to rejig our timetable a little bit, but we have you with us now. Sometimes we rely on technology so much, and then when there's a blip, we don't know quite how to deal with it. But we've got you here now, which is fantastic. So I'm just going to start by introducing Dan, and then we will go into our conversation. So we are really delighted to have Dan Harris here. Dan is a professor at ARMIT in Australia, where they're Associate Dean for Research and Innovation in the School of Education. So Dan is bringing that sort of, if you like, more higher education focused academic perspective when we would absolutely count the sort of action research perspective as a practitioner researcher perspective, and that's one of the things we're hoping to bring through in this event, is that diversity of understanding from different colleagues and different kinds of research and scholarly roles. So Dan does bring that expertise as a professor. They're an Australian Research Council Future Fellow and co-director of the Creative Agency. At some point, Dan, you might want to pop that link into the chat, because that's a great online facility and resource to have a look at as to what's going on in Australia there that Dan's running at Armit. Dan is also a prolific author and has put into the world about 17 books, plays, films, and spoken word performances. And this is one of the reasons we wanted to have Dan come and be part of the conversation, because of your kind of crossover into that sort of performance and arts world, as well as your research in the creativity sector. Dan's research focuses on the intersection of creativity at both practice and policy levels, and brings some really interesting angles on culture, sexuality and gender diversities, and on performance, and really importantly on activism. So it's great to have you with us, Dan. I'm going to kick off with my first question, and obviously you're going to be able to answer this from multiple perspectives, hopefully. We want to kick off just by asking you about your personal perspective on creative pedagogies, and how for you would go about researching and practicing them. I'm aware there's about 3 layers to that question, so over to you to kind of dive in.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie, and sorry for the technical glitch trying to log on this morning. It's great to be here, and hi, everyone. Yes, so I'll start by answering that from the perspective of the lab leader of our creative agency research lab, which you mentioned. And I guess one of the real core mandates that we operate around is from a creative pedagogies perspective, and that's sort of perceiving pedagogies in a broad and multidisciplinary, and also kind of like transdisciplinary and multi-perspectival way. So we operate in almost all we do from a post-human, more than human perspective and position, and that is looking at sort of life and place in particular, and ecologies as pedagogy. And we try and help the students that we work with and the higher education teachers and researchers that we work with to look at their environments in that way. And some of the work that I've been doing for the last 10 years has particularly been around the heuristic of creative ecologies. And so we're kind of pushing back on that traditional ed psych, especially in education. I guess that ed psych, the cognitive, the individualist, you might say the humanist perspective on creativity or human creativity as an individual pursuit, or even indeed the concept of creative thinking, which I know is the focus of the new PISA measure, as well as most of the national curricula that we know of operating globally today, including in Australia, is around thinking, cognition, and individualist achievement, or habits of mind, let's say. We're sort of pushing back on that. We're looking at the ways in which creativity really emerges from an environment and particular cultural, situational, historical conditions, and that it's interrelated in those conditions and those relationships from which it emerges. And I guess I would also say, and this is probably a point for further for later conversation with this wonderful group gathering, but I would include in that AI and the ways in which AI right now is really pushing our considerations of creativity. So there's a lot of as you'd all know, there's a lot of conversation in social media, in the popular media around, and especially in education, around the possibilities and dangers of ChatGPT and other forms of AI that are emerging. And there's this kind of really, I think, human-centered conversation about, sure, it can do a few things. It's incredibly it's got incredible potential and it's exciting, a little bit scary, but it can't do what humans can do. And I mean, part of what we do in our lab is really look at the ways in which we kind of mythologize human agency and human possibility. And while we believe in the beautiful mysteriousness and mystery and of creativity, I would sort of say I'm interested in seeing what AI is going to do, not because I want for human creativity to be replaced in any way or replicated, but I would say that maybe it's challenging us to think in new ways about creativity as we produce it, as we evidence it in our actions, and that's some of what the agenda of creative agency is about.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. I'm gonna go back into one of the points earlier. I'd like to come back to the AI question in a minute as well, but you mentioned this notion that a lot of the education system, and globally speaking here, a lot of the education system works in a way that often posits creativity as about the thinking, the cog psych, the individualistic approach. And that works very well with the kind of school system that we have, I think, in many global cultures that are measurement and testing based. What can we do as researchers, and how can teachers start to become part of that pushback that you're describing? I think that's a hard job, and I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, for how teachers themselves in the system that they're in, which is different to perhaps some of the freedoms that we have in higher education. How did they start to engage with this notion of pushback?
Well, you know, for the last 10 years or so, I've been funded by the Australian Research Council to do research into creativity, largely in schools and higher education, and somewhat in industry as well. But looking at the ways in which creative education is really different across those sectors and those parts of the sectors. I guess one of the things that I would say is that I really believe that compulsory education needs to move toward taking a less individualist approach. And those kinds of approaches or skills have been on the list of creative skills and capacities for, you know, 2 decades, well, really more, but certainly kind of schematized for the last 20 or 30 years in terms of how we help foster creativity. And there are several people in the group here today who have pushed that work forward. But it's longstanding work, and it's longstanding definitional work. You know, what is creativity? I think in education, we spend too much time defining and assessing and less time fostering, to be honest. And I think that it is a kind of systemic change that is being asked of the compulsory education systems around the world. But in certain ways, that's starting to happen. And I would say COVID helped push that forward in some respect. And I think artificial intelligence and other forms of digital technology are helping push that forward as well. So if you have systems that are now sort of, I guess, being pushed forward by developmental technology and also circumstance like pandemics that say, well, you know, our students, our year 7 students could get this information anywhere. How do we know it's not being replicated or mostly replicated? It's not original work. Then I think the shift starts to happen toward collaboration, toward iteration, ideation and iteration in groups, and, you know, other kinds of evidencing of creative skills and capacities. I think the other thing that's starting to help that shift is industry saying, and they've been saying for quite some time, you know, we're not, and I take the point from the previous couple who were in conversation, that, you know, in education, we are doing more than just work readiness. That's absolutely true. But I would argue a large part of what we're doing is work readiness, because no matter what we tell ourselves and what we try and do in schools, in compulsory education, primary and secondary, at the end of the day, if your children are graduating from high school and they're not able to get into college or into a job, parents are not happy, but parents are worried. So I would still argue that it's a large part of what compulsory education is there for. And if that's true, and if we're listening to industry, then what they're saying is not only are students coming out ill-prepared or completely unprepared, and I would argue pushing us back into a kind of 1950s model of like it's just tech industry instead of factories, but they're starting to educate them, train their workforce themselves. Because they're not coming out trained in ways that they want them to be. So I'm not saying that the tail should wag the dog necessarily, but I'm saying compulsory education has always had to have a conversation, be in conversation with industry. And right now that conversation isn't working very well.
Yeah, I think there's lots of tensions there that you've identified, Dan. I'd like to come back now to your point about AI. It's absolutely, as you say, a really live area of debate at the moment, especially in terms of that sort of interchange between human and machine and what that means for creativity. One of the things from my perspective that I think as you call it, the post-human approach has to its advantage perhaps is the way it looks at ethics differently. And I wonder about this question of how we can perhaps think ethically. I know you've you engage in this a lot through your activist work and other of the kind of projects you're involved in, but how might we think about creative pedagogies perhaps ethically differently with this shift to a post-human perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that's dear to my heart. I've done activist work both as a playwright and as a scholar. I think, I'll just refer back to our friend for me, predecessor Anna Kraft, who warned us, about the obsession with innovation. She not only framed it as wise creativity, but also a sustainable creativity. She talked about the dangers of kind of what I've called the commodification of creativity. And I wrote a book that came out in 2014 called The Creative Turn. It was really one of my first toes in the water in this respect, and sort of said, this at the time, now almost a decade ago, this rhetoric about the democratization of creativity in education, it's really a commodification, and we can argue that. I know people have different views on it, but the kind of language around everyone's creative, everyone can do creativity. I think there's tensions around creativity in education versus creativity in the arts, and the history of that going back to Alfred Whitehead, and process philosophy, and then the kind of contemporary creative industries discourse that I thank my UK colleagues for. That's now a global phenomenon. Those are not the same creativities, and for me, when you commodify creativity and say to all artists that they need to be entrepreneurs, that's essentially doing what Anna Kraft warned us against, which is commodifying creativity in its packaging up with the idea of new and innovative. And in a sense, I think that's the moment we're still in. But perhaps the post-human creativity movement, which I think is well underway at this time in terms of a discourse, a scholarly discourse, that's really asking us to say, well, who is this serving and how far can it go? I mean, I think AI is offering some ways in which, most of the critiques of the AI creativity nexus that I've seen in the last few weeks and perhaps months have been around the fact that, sure, it can do all this stuff, but it can't be creative like we are. And I think, oh gosh, really, are we gonna fall prey to that self-aggrandizing folly yet again? I mean, I love humans, being one, but I don't necessarily think that we that we can do things that other, non-humans can't do. And that goes to artificial intelligence, and it goes to animals, and it goes to environmental regeneration. And I think we ignore that at our peril, and we keep putting ourselves at the top of the heap at our peril. And so I think, well, I mean, there was a great article recently on CNN about, a drama class that used ChatGPT to write a play, and then they performed it and they worked with it, and it still was really boring. And all of us in drama felt really gratified by that, right? And I'm like, okay, but it's like Wednesday in the week of artificial intelligence. By Friday, it's going to be like writing plays like, Shakespeare. So I think that in a sense it is scary, but it's also, the horse is bolted, and I think it's happening. And the more we can work with these pressures, like the climate catastrophe that's inevitable, the AI ethical quandary that's happening already. It's not inevitable. It's happening. The more we can work with them, I think the more we will, in fact, get out of an idea of creativity is just a thinking thing that we can measure, and rather it's a doing thing that, in my opinion, really pivots on collaboration with our environment, our ecology, and everything in it, in respectful ways, ethical ways.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I like getting into this notion of the sort of doing of the creativity. As I said at the beginning, you've got fingers in many pies, Dan, and it would be really great to hear from you what you think are some of the best examples of practice that you've come across recently of creative pedagogies, because you have a strong international reach. So it'd be great if you've got a couple of examples from practice of strong creative pedagogies in action, perhaps.
Yeah, I think there are some really inspiring individual localized examples in my research work. In particular, I've been privileged to visit schools in the States and Canada and Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, here in Oceania, we call it, in the Pacific, of schools that are following a number of different models. So some adhere to a kind of design thinking approach, and that underpins everything that they do from K to 12. There are others that more recently are starting to use gaming principles and logics. There's a school in New York, and there are a couple schools here in Australia, using those kinds of logics to underpin everything they do, and their approach to, we have a national curriculum in Australia, in their approach to that national curriculum. But I guess what I would say is, we can talk ad nauseum about models and heuristics. In fact, I was talking with Pam Bernard recently about, colleagues here who have another model of, is it the 4 C's, or is it the 5 K's, or is it the 6 P's, or, and, great. Like, nobody wants to reinvent the wheel. We all need models. And I have my own through my creative ecology school audit. But I think in some respects, and maybe this is middle-aged talking, but I sort of feel, there comes a point where, we have to move beyond our fetishization and desperate desire for a cookie cutter toolkit. Yes, something to help us kick off, because we're all time poor, especially in compulsory school settings. But at the same time, I think one of the things that, that Anna Kraft and others have left us with as a legacy, and particularly our Indigenous colleagues, and we have incredible leading scholars down here in the global South from New Zealand and Tonga and Samoa, and indeed Australia, who continue to try and remind us that everything is place specific. And if we look at creative research into creativity beyond education, for the last 100 years. There is extensive ethnographic research that tells us that ways of thinking about, doing, defining creativity are culture specific, context specific, historically specific. And so that's been some of my research, is to look into creativity in East Asia. How are we doing it here? Is it the same as in the global North or the West? Largely the UK and the North and South Americas. And if it's not, why do we continue to have this kind of global, which I think is an imperialist a kind of discourse around creativity, which is really a kind of global North and Western creative industries, creative partnerships discourse. Does it work for everyone? So people want to be in a global conversation, but I would just say, in my experience, it's a combination of tried and true research, evidence-based stuff, sure, that tells us what it is and how to foster creativity, but it's got to be combined with the local needs, contexts, and strengths of each place, and encouraging that, which kind of is running counter to the absolutely genericizing kind of global discourse around creativity. And I know that's kind of in some sorts of tension with the PISA creativity test, and the PISA and other kind of global measures like that, design thinking, definitions and processes, those are shorthands for, in my opinion, for making creativity important in contexts where it's not really, or for helping people understand who don't necessarily understand or know how to approach things. The PISA test will go a great way toward prioritizing creativity skills in schools around the globe for the countries who adhere to the PISA tests. I mean, it's great. We've had localized kind of approaches to trying to get a creativity test alongside literacy and numeracy measures here in Australia. But having that PISA test come in from the global level means schools have to pay attention. I mean, there are certain advantages. I'm saying in terms of actioning that, it must be combined with the local, and that's the part that I think is not always present.
Yeah, I think that's, again, it takes me back to Anna's work, her 2005 book, where she really makes that point about the cultural context and a global overview that can gloss over that identity and identities from different places and environments. So I think absolutely making sure those are part of the equation is absolutely needed. We're just on the cusp of running out of time, Dan, so I'm just going to wrap up with one. I'm going to ask you for one quick answer to a last question. If you could see one thing happen next for the field of creative pedagogies, what one thing would you like to see happen moving forward?
Wow. Okay. Well, I would redesign all national curricula around the globe. Just a small one.
Okay, that's getting some thumbs up from the audience. Bill is definitely getting that a thumbs up. I think many of us are with you on that one. Right, so on that really positive note, I shall say a massive thank you to Dan. We're going to redesign curricula around the world. Thank you, Dan, for that suggestion and the rest of your input. Really great, and really glad you made it to join us. Again, Dan will be in the breakout room later. If you're lucky enough to be with him there, you can pick his brains further. But I'm going to hand over now to Zoe Lewis and Amanda and her team from the States. Over to you, Zoe.
Hi, thanks, Gary. Just waiting for Amanda and Olive. They're coming.
Hello.
Hi, then.
Hello.
Olive, Deirdre, can you? No. Deirdre? Hey, there we go. So I'm delighted to welcome our team of 3 here. We have Dr. Amanda Guller, who is a Professor of English Education at Lehman College, the City University of New York. We have Olu Animashan, who's a doctoral student in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching
at Teachers College, Columbia University, as well as being a 6th grade ELA teacher. And we have Deirdre Holman, who's also a doctoral student at the Teachers College, Columbia University, with over 20 years of experience engaging teenagers and teens in the study of history, art and culture. Welcome. Now, we three are going to share these questions amongst us. We're going to consider the same material, but we're going to go with Dan's suggestion there about the focus on the local and the cultural, and see whether we can contribute some more diversity to these ideas. So to start us off, I'm going to ask each of you, please, to share with us your personal perspective on creative pedagogies and how they're researched and practiced. Amanda, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you. And it's so interesting to be in this international conversation. And the three of us are very much in a New York perspective. And while we New Yorkers do consider that we are the center of the universe, we realize that we have much to learn from our colleagues. This conversation has resonated so much in terms of thinking about how we need to rethink the idea of collaborative learning, say, in connection with creativity. I think that's one of the ways in which I'm thinking about the gap between research and practice, that researchers often see from this bird's eye view perspective, and then we have the practitioners who are on the ground dealing with the everyday problems of schooling, the standardized testing that they have to get through. And so what happens is when there's an idea that's interesting, it often becomes formalized and turned into these little boxes and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we have a culture of not trusting teachers to be creative and to be intellectual. So I think that what needs to happen, and Dan's voice is very much still ringing in my ears as well, is the notion of while we're learning to live in this post-human world, also learning to embrace our humanity at the same time, and the two are not at odds. I think that the two speak to one another. I don't want to take up too much space. I want to leave room for Deirdre and Olu, but I just want to say that I think that creativity is a mindset that needs to be sort of infused across the curriculum. And it's really about giving voice to the imagination. And I want to say more about this later, but just the idea, I want to put a pin on the idea of voice as something that we really learned to deeply engage with during the pandemic as a means of creating community and finding our way through this mess that we were in together. Take it.
Yeah, Amanda, that was amazing. I like every time we're together, I'm like goosebumps. So what I'll add or like continue on that thread of thought is this idea of collaboration, and not only thinking about researchers and teachers, but also teachers and their students. And what does it look like for us to like truly redesign the curriculum hand in hand with them? I think as we think about how we embrace the humanity of ourselves as teachers, especially in this era where I feel like we're being uber mechanized or even being replaced by AI, or like that idea being out there. But I also think about the humanity of our students as well. And what does it look like for us to honor that throughout the entire process of curriculum, whether it be the process, whether it be the doing, and whether it be the product of it, right? And so when I think about creativity and what that looks like as pedagogy, I think about the ways in which we speculate how we think about curriculum altogether differently. How do we reimagine a way in which it is not a top down, here I'm coming in with something to give you, and that maybe you change along the way, but also how is it something that we're all together building and doing and rethinking and recreating all the way through it.
Thank you. Deirdre?
Great to be here. I think I would like to add to the conversation the fact that my teaching experience comes primarily from museum and library space. I worked as director of education at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem. And so the idea that we should be thinking about our kind of local ecologies and the cultures and the communities in which we teach is very much a part of the work that I've been doing. And so bringing students into a museum archive space, I already feel like I've had a great privilege in being able to rethink how education happens in that space. And you know, museums at large have a certain kind of creative pedagogy when it comes to engaging artwork and objects. But when it comes to teaching teens and teachers alike in the same space, but when it comes to teaching teenagers about the world and about themselves through the archives, and in an interpretive space, I've always felt the creative pedagogy of having them understand how other people have created these cultural products and then to engage them in the creation of their own cultural products is the pedagogy that I followed. And so they will study the arts and the literature, the film and the sculpture and the media, the journalism, even the academic scholarship, but then they'll go and create their own. And so they're charged with creating their own art and literature and radio shows and magazines and comic books and all of the things that they've studied from. And so to me, it's a way of activating a new set of creative ideas in students. And I've come to really appreciate how alternative texts beyond the black and white word on a page can really stimulate some really deep, imaginative, speculative thinking in young people that goes beyond the kind of learning that they bristle against in the classroom. And so I've been in a playground in museum settings that I think has been very generative in terms of thinking about creative pedagogies.
I hope you might come back to some of that in a minute when I ask you for some examples. But just before we go there, is there something about right now that makes creative pedagogies really important?
Oh, well, yeah, yes, in terms of, well, the eternal now, because it's always important. But I think that we are really at an inflection point where we've all over the world been through an experience where we've had to pause, and I think that it would be shameful for us not to continually ask the question, what have we learned that we want to keep and build on, and what perspective have we gained on our previous way of working in schools that we see now really needs to change. One thing I'm thinking about a lot with this conversation is the notion of collaborative learning and the way it's been formalized. And we have these cooperative learning little pods, and we put kids in groups, and one's the note taker and one's the person who looks up the words. And I appreciate the idea of everybody, it seems like busy work to me, as opposed to learning how groups function organically. And I think that we need to focus on the idea of organic creativity. And I think of Parker Palmer, who talked about not student-centered education or teacher-centered education, but subject-centered education, where we are all in this collaborative endeavor, learning something together. And then the material, the curriculum, becomes this living entity and not just this dead letter that we all have to gain mastery over. I mean, that's just one possible idea of many.
I think you look ready to go.
Yeah, I'm thinking very like concretely about the book bans that have been happening across the US and the ways in which, as like an English literature teacher, I think about the ways that these book bans and the ways that we're thinking about them are restricting thinking and the ability for us to be as creative as possible with our students, right? And for our students to think outside the box. And so there is a set of like books written by queer authors, books that have queer author leads that are being banned, and that's particularly difficult, especially with the constituency that I work with, to have their stories literally be erased in front of them and their ability to like manifest who they are, who they want to be, and in that way, like calling their creativity, right, in the ways in which they are who they are, and so I'm just thinking a lot about just like the ways in which there's a very clear like plan to erase folks and how that also is like makes it very necessary for creativity pedagogy to like be present um, for the literal lives and the beings in our rooms.
And I think that now especially in American culture, but I'm sure there are echoes around the world, I think we're still, regrettably, still struggling against a kind of cultural singularity of thought that's trying to create if you want to call it a hegemonic way of thinking, or very, very narrow, very just singular set of ideas that are supposed to be standard. And now more than ever, we have so many rich ways of knowing, ways of seeing the world, ways of imagining what could be in the world through different cultural lenses. And I think the knowledge that is as ancient as it is modern, that we're still not garnishing the riches of all of those different kinds of knowledges. And so now more than ever, we need creative pedagogies that are going to continue to push against the kind of hegemonic thought that exists in our standardized curriculum, and bring in, all of this knowledge that's possible and that we need to kind of seed our existence. I mean, we always talk about the future kind of engagement of young people through technologies, but I think there's also a way that we need to be educating ourselves and our students that kind of is aside from technologies, because we're forgetting our traditional and our indigenous ways of being and living in the world. Like, what happens if the power goes off? Like, how are we gonna do all of these things? And we have the knowledge, but are we nurturing it? Are we passing it down, paying it forward, and all of those things? So I think now we're at a critical juncture where we really need to prepare ourselves across those avenues.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add, I guess I really appreciate bringing to the conversation the idea of censorship, and we are in such a moment of that, and it's so tremendously dangerous, and it is, as Dan said in the chat, the very antithesis of the idea of creative pedagogies, because if you eliminate whole histories and groups of identities from the national and international conversation, it's like you really do erase people and ways of thinking and ways of being, and these indigenous ways of knowing, among many other things that Deirdre just referred to. And that's why we need to use our creativity and our imaginative thinking to keep those identities alive, and because those are the creative identities. I mean, when we think about queer identities over history and people of color, that is where all of our cultural beauty and innovation has come from, and it's a very deliberate attempt at erasure for the purpose of control that we need to fight against.
Also, quickly on that note, sorry, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of destructive imagination that Maxine Green brings up towards like later end of her work, and something I've really been sitting with is that like at the end of the day, like the censorship is someone's imagining, right? It is someone's like creative will and force to like bring about a particular world that they see. And so I think also as we think about creative pedagogies, what does it also mean to like allow the people that we work with, the students that we work with, to like also use that their imagination, right, as like a force of their will too, right? Like to also recognize that imagination always isn't this like beautiful positive thing, as like I think a lot of us see it and recognize it to be in the same creativity, but there are also like imaginations and creativity that are actively working against us. So what does it mean for us to like really sit with that power, sit with that will, and like activate it towards something better?
I'm thinking about all these diverse views of possibilities for creativity here. And then I'm wondering whether we're in danger of closing down those diverse views through our definitions and understandings of what creativity is. And so I'm going to ask you if you can give us some examples, please, of a more diverse way of thinking about it. Some more examples from practice that we could hang our thinking on.
Sure. Are you looking for actual, on hands-on practice things?
Yeah, practice, please, Amanda.
Sure. I'm gonna go back to again that moment of the beginning of the pandemic.
Oh, Amanda's just frozen. Is that the same for everyone?
Yeah.
I could jump in while we wait for
it, Deirdre. Let's hope that we can get Amanda back. And some
hopefully she can hear us. I would jump in and say that an example from practice would be, again, me pulling from my experience working in Harlem with Harlem, New York, with a diverse population of students, middle and high school students. So we worked with youth on Saturdays who were age 11 through 18, so the middle grades and the high school grades. And we worked with them as a large cohort, 150 students, and then we would break into age-appropriate groups for some of our study. But I think part of what we experience in terms of creative pedagogies and how I would venture to define creativity is that we have to have the retro thinking, like thinking about the past, thinking about our present situation, and thinking about the future. So you could call that the retrospective, the prospective, and the present focused thinking. But I think part of what the creativity and the thinking that we were asking from our young people was to always be traversing those three temporal planes. And, in West African, I guess, symbolism, there's the idea of Sankofa. And the Adinkra symbol for Sankofa is a bird that's looking over its back. So it's about being alive in the present, but always referencing the past and also thinking toward the future. And part of our pedagogical practice is engaging our young people in that speculative thought, right? Because as Olu was pointing out brilliantly, and thank you for bringing the concept of destructive imagination back into the conversation, is that many people are thinking about the future and shaping it today, and we want young people to be immediately engaged in doing that work, not in some future that's far off for them, or some future like engagement in work or in their lives, but in their now, like totally activating their agency to think, to dream, to think, to act in the present, but with that retrospective and that prospective thought happening together. So somehow I would shape that with a little more time to conceive it into a definition of what creative thinking or creative pedagogy would be.
Wow, thank you. Amanda, welcome back.
Thank you. And this is why we hate technology. So I was just reflecting on that the notion of needing to be adaptable and this intellectual agility that, and I think that it's very much rooted in empathy. Maxine Green talked about the social imagination, and what she said was that, you know, I don't want the arts to just make people think or feel, but to hold someone's hand and act. And that was what I took to heart when we shut down. And I said, well, okay, the most important thing I can do right now is to keep us together. And the best way to do that is to just put down all of our requirements and engage with each other's humanity. So I told everybody to, you know, take a picture of something in your house that's important to you and write a story or poem about it. And that kind of brought us back into community. And it was just a very simple thing, but the simplicity of it itself was an acknowledgement of, like, you know, what Ola was talking about. It's like, all this technology is great. What happens when the power goes out? You know, we need to really engage with our most basic selves. And I connect in that sense the idea of creativity and voice to the notion of radical empathy, where we show up with ourselves and make ourselves vulnerable as teachers and learners, because ultimately it's the humanity that connect us. That, you know, kids are not going to learn from somebody that they don't trust or feel comfortable with. And so it is that humanity. And I feel a little, you know, quaint keep coming back to that word, but it's a hill I'm willing to die on, at the same time as I'm willing to say, like, okay, ChatGPT is a thing and we're going to have to learn how to live with that in the world too, but not to cede our own agency to this other thing that we don't understand yet.
Okay, we are coming very close to the end of our time, but just before we finish, could I ask each of you? Oh, exciting things going on outside someone's window.
Sorry.
Could I ask you just to finish, please, with one quick thing that you think is our most important next step, taking creative pedagogies forward? Olive, your turn, I think.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Can I just like co-sign on Dan's earlier comment of just like redesigning curriculum everywhere? Can I just like dig up that? Co-sign, ditto, yes, yes, and yes.
You can. Deirdre?
Yeah, I think I would encourage us to think outside of the school building, outside of the classroom, and to actually engage the cities, the towns, the rural areas, the museums, the cultural organizations that are around, and hold all of that knowledge, that cultural knowledge that we're talking about, to really like break down that wall between the school and the community.
And Amanda.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and yes, 100,000% yes, and also to think organically in terms of how we learn collaboratively. I think that the notion of job readiness to me is not about how do you train somebody for a specific widget making job. It's really more, how do you train people to work together, to be sparked by each other's creativity, to work in teams, because I think that is very much an important reality that we don't learn by, I'm the note taker and you're the person who looks up the words, and you know, and also the organic collaboration needs to be across the curriculum. So how do math and science and history all inform each other is how I think we need to start thinking.
It has been an absolute delight talking with the three of you. Thank you so much. And I'll hand back over, please.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Deirdre, Olu and Amanda and Zoe for hosting that particular part of our conversation. Now it's time to really open the floor to the rest of the participants in our seminar today to go into our breakout rooms. So we have Jo Trousdale, Pam Bernard, Rosina Dorelli and Sarah Childs hosting the 4 rooms. Dan from BERA, I think, has been beavering away, organising people in the background into those groups to go into the breakout rooms. We will have about 25 minutes, I think, no, bit shorter than that, about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then we will come back and be sharing back in the space some plenary thoughts from each of our facilitators. So Dan, in the background, if you can hear me, if you could send us all off into our breakout rooms, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
I'm going to start by asking whether my co-host Zoe might be able to kick us off with a sense of what was discussed initially, and then I'm going to pick up on a couple of points as a follow-up. Zoe, are you there?
I'm here, yes. Oh, I hope I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can hear me. Yes, so a lot of focus on time, making time, the challenges of a crowded curriculum, lots of willing, enthusiastic teachers and principals, but coming up against the opportunities, whether that's accountability frameworks, testing, other kinds of measures and expectations of parents as well. But yeah, the focus was on time there.
The discussion as I came into it seemed to be very much about exploring and the frustration of the tensions. There was a real sense of the shift there's been in recent decades, the kind of maybe the global focus on particular kinds of testing. Obviously, we know the context for us in England, but it didn't seem to be that was just a UK tension from our international conversation. And it felt to me that the conversation was very much around ways in which the structures can be disrupted. That actually the only way forward was to disrupt or alter ways forward. And there were some really nice examples coming out of a different creative collaborative that Paul was talking about in relation to building the kind of capacity and the capacity for practitioners and coaches, different kinds of roles within schooling to grow that collaborative ways of working have been very dominant. And I think I just also want to pick on the last thing. So because there were a number of kind of sense of the difficulties, I asked Dan a question right at the end around what the characteristics might be. And they seem to come back again to the collaboration and iteration and agency, and about the significance of us looking at ways forward in education that are principle based rather than necessarily a do it this way based. So
yes, the point just before you came in there was that we need creativity, and maybe the AI context is helping us along the way. We need it to challenge the status quo. There's a point that you just missed before you came.
Okay, thanks. Great. All right. Thanks very much for that. I'm going to ask whether Sarah might come in next and talk about, give us a taste of what was discussed in your group.
Hi Jo, hi everyone, nice to see everyone again. What a privilege to be in my breakout room. There was an initial discussion around curriculum and the importance of this curriculum design that we're all currently working in, and does it really reflect our students and our communities and their needs of learning moving forward? Is it engaging enough? Is it exciting enough? Are our young people really excited about having that want to learn moving forward into their adult lives? How we develop that and how we channel that so that actually the creative pedagogies are part of that learning, so that it actually really is current and kind of timely at this moment is really interesting. And this idea that this like for learning being right now, and actually do the creative skills, the creative pedagogies have a real place, and why that matters in education. If we can't completely rewrite the curriculum, we then kind of moved into a conversation about, well, how do we do this? And, you know, what are those next steps? And interestingly, there was a great discussion around the importance for teacher development. You know, where does continuous professional development, CPD, sit for staff right now? How can we start with where teachers are at? How do we make them really do some of that real expert teaching that they have? And where does that sit? You know, can we encourage them to be more creative in their classrooms? You know, how do we encourage them perhaps to take more risks in their own delivery for young people, how they actually might try something and it fails, and develop that culture of learning to grow from failure. And we did talk about time. It was interesting you mentioned time in your group there and how we manage time. But, you know, if we're going to shake a curriculum, then why don't we shake the structure of the school day? You know, why don't we structure how we look at homework, you know, how we look at timetabling? You know, if we have the opportunity to completely throw it all up in the air and start again, then there's some really brave and exciting ideas that came out of our discussions.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Sarah. That's grand. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move over to Rosina and see whether any of what we've had so far chimes with you, or what new things you might bring to the table for us from your group.
Yeah, that was really good. I did, I don't know if you can see me, I did drop out at one moment, but I came back in. We had talking about a lot of the similar kind of things. It was really about this issue, exactly the same as you were saying, of how we're going to actually implement this. It's so difficult. We've got the issue with teachers being afraid to do something new, and also not being able to do something new, because you've got the government and you've got saying we need this, you've got Ofsted saying we need this, and it's all about getting results, because the whole of thing is an exam factory. So it's about changing assessment, and it's about changing the university entrance issue, I think, is one of the issues. But we did talk about ways that you could change things, like telling stories and using storytelling as a way of learning, as that's been used in neuroscience. So there are things that one can do within the current system, changing the environment to be more hospitable, maybe, and looking at more languages and being able to just include people more. We were looking at how, I think it was mainly about teacher training and how we can do that. I think it was a collaboration over competition, and how we could get maybe the teachers working more together. So rather than this kind of concept in schools where teachers don't come out of their siloed little department, maybe we could get teachers actually collaborating. We also talked about one of the ways we could make this change is by doing it in Key Stage 3, because Key Stage 3 is an area which at the moment is a bit of a dead zone, and in schools, and it's less kind of onus on Key Stage 3. So it could be a place where we could start this Year 7 and Year 8, if we can do project-based learning where you haven't got to worry about the exams. So
fantastic, some really great stuff in there. Yeah, fantastic.
Great, thanks.
Pam, I'm going to move over to you in the knowledge that you will have been listening intently also to all of that and help us in pulling it together. Pam, are you with us? No?
Pam, I think you're muted.
Muted. Can't hear you still.
Got me now? Right. Silence is a beautiful thing. And we had no silence in our group, and yet there were moments where there were silences, especially with the second question. The first question, loads, 2 pages of notes, writing. Second question, 2 points only. So there were overlaps in that first. Why does creative pedagogies matter? Curriculum was a huge point. The pushback on curriculum is huge. You know, the structure, the discourse, the constraint of timetables, maybe flipping and having space tables, thinking differently about planning, taking some lessons from industry as well in terms of the practice. But people were also saying, well, thinking differently about the response ability that youngsters are taking for wanting to change their future, wanting to change their present. that future making education. So getting the voice of youngsters into the curriculum co-authorship and to address the sort of societal uncertainties that are just not going to go away. So responsibility, flexibility, plasticity was also sort of aspects of what was being said. Engagement with the arts was also discussed and problematized in terms of that seems to be kind of still up there for grabs in terms of what's the role of the arts in society, like what's the role of science in society. Both those questions are deeply, deeply debated. So, you know, thinking about arts and its contribution, it was said, Kerry said, why don't we think about the arts as catalysing change, catalysing creativity, creative pedagogies? I'd flip that and say, what about science catalysing arts? Why do we keep siloing ourselves? Why not look at industry and say, how do they engage in creative pedagogies? Because they're doing creative pedagogies, they just don't call it that. So, you know, the authoring of how they work together. And there was a beautiful contribution by Ursula, who said in her work, where she looks at what is industry for and what they think at this time, she was saying they're right into creativity. It's an assumption. It's on. It's a must. It's the air you breathe in industry is authoring, you know, newness and change and sustainability. So authoring, co-authoring. So collaboration was huge. Transdisciplinarity is a huge practice in industry. And of course, possibility thinking of Anna Craft here with what if, asking what if we were to invite youngsters to actually make big decisions to do with curricula and how it's actually, you know, performed. If pedagogy is how we practice and perform thinking and learning. Last point, and that was AI. Huge, huge issue. It's not an elephant in the room. It's bolted. And so thinking about the momentum of AI and utilising that for what's the next steps, and thinking about nature culture is also an important thing, to bring in different species and thinking about human, non-human and more than human, I think is part of the momentum for change for creative pedagogies.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we are out of time. So I think I'm getting echo back. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm going to say we are literally in our last minutes. I think there's been a huge drive back to us as collective organisations involved in this event to take forward what we mean by disruption. There's a real passion around the way in which creativity can disrupt, and to do so in humane, collaborative, in ways that are already out there. So it seems to me there's something about the porousness of education, the diversity of creativity, and us working together as a team of practitioners and researchers across the world wanting to make that happen. So I think that's our next remit, Kerry. We need to be talking to our partners to take that forward. Thank you so much, everybody, for today. We now have a short break before we have the esteemed colleague, Professor Kerry Chappell, coming to talk to us for the Anna Craft talk. So I believe all we do at this point in time is just mute our cameras and our mics in order to come back, but I'm just going to check in with Vera because I realised I didn't check that final bit in the tech talk before. Is that correct?
Sorry, I gave you a thumb up there, but yes, that's exactly right.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and especially for our, you know, our speakers who came and spoke in conversation with us in such a generous way. It's been such an exciting event. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in 15 minutes.
And welcome to everybody who's joined us this evening for this annual Anna Craft Memorial Lecture. This lecture is being held in association with the Bera Creativity SIG, which Anna actually set up with Bob Jeffrey many years ago. Professor Craft was internationally known for her work on creativity, on creative pedagogies, creative learning, mainly in the early and primary years. When I look back at her body of work, I was astounded, really, although I shouldn't have been surprised, to find she'd written 5 single-authored books, 10 edited collections, 53 chapters, and 46 peer-reviewed papers, and she was, sadly, at the time of her demise, only 52 years old. Now, that is going some, I would say. I was privileged to be both a colleague and a friend of Anna's, and when she passed, Kerry Chappell, who was working then at the University of Exeter, as she is now, as Anna indeed was, and I, who was working then at the Open University, as indeed I am now, we're long in the tooth in both respects, decided to set up, as those were the 2 universities that Anna was working in, we set up an annual memorial lecture. The intention of these lectures is to help sustain Anna's very significant legacy, and thus to disseminate the best contemporary thinking about creativity and in education, both in this country, but also significantly abroad. We've had a large number of illuminaries offering us their connections to Anna's work and their understandings, including Sir Ken Robinson, Guy Claxton, Pat Cochrane, James Kaufman, Howard Gardner, and last year, Veronica Robbins. And this year we have the privilege, which I'm looking forward to enormously, of listening to Dr. Kerry Chappell share hers. But at this moment, I'm going to hand over now to Sandy Allen, who's the head of the school at the University of Exeter, head of School of Education. Sandy.
Thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you everyone for the invitation to join you this afternoon. It really is a privilege to be here, to pause and reflect on colleagues and their really important contributions in research terms. I'm not quite sure how time's come to pass as it has done, but I've been involved in a variety of ways with the School of Education at Exeter for nearly 15 years now. And given that, I was really fortunate to have joined the department at a very similar time to Professor Anna Craft. And I was just a part-time research fellow when I joined all that time ago, with little contact outside of the project I was working on. But even then, it was really hard not to get to know Anna or for her to leave an impression. And I know that several of the obituaries that were written commented on her warmth, her supportive and generous nature. And I know this to be true. Through many of the junior academics I was working with at the time, I saw firsthand the serious impact that both her thinking and her generosity had on them. She spent many hours mentoring colleagues, writing alongside them, encouraging them to pursue their own methods and interests. But even for someone like me who was slightly further removed, I remember well the warmth that she radiated in staff meetings or just as you happened to pass by her office. And I remember also this alongside the really refreshing challenges and provocations that she'd bring to meetings here in the School of Education to keep people thinking about why they did what they did or what they'd said. Indeed, when I think of Anna, I really do think of her as a professor in the fullest sense of the term, as an internationally renowned expert in her field, a renowned teacher, a leader, and a mentor. And I feel very fortunate to have witnessed someone fulfilling that role in the way that they did at such an early and formative stage in my own career. But as you'd imagine, Anna doesn't just live on in terms of her impression. Her work is still really well utilised and we return to it all the time in our department, as I'm sure many of you do elsewhere too. It never ceases to prompt a smile when I see students reference her work or they start to discuss it in seminars, often because of the joy they too experience when they come across her ideas for the first time. And so, as well as reflect on Anna, I've also got the privilege of introducing you to one of my other colleagues, who is our keynote speaker this afternoon, Dr. Kerry Chappell. And I'm sure I don't have to say much by way of introduction for Kerry. I'm sure she's well known to many of you. And you may well also know that she joined Anna Craft's team around 2008. So first working with Anna on question posing with possibility thinking, and then moving on to examine possibility thinking in relation to wise humanising creativity, a concept that Kerry and Anna conceived together. And Kerry's background has been in dance education. And this is something I believe I'm right in saying she continues to think on and return to in practice and research today. Her own intellectual project, if we want to talk about it in that way, is one where she explores how we conceive of and teach for creativity in education. And hers is a unique perspective because it's driven by that dance education background. So it's one where she sees embodied dialogue as the key driver of creativity. Now, Kerry's work as an educator and researcher also regularly raises a smile from me because of the way I think it continues to draw on and remind us of Anna's work, but also because of the way in which she's taken it, how it's played out in various different ways which I think no doubt would have surprised and delighted Anna too. So without further ado, Kerry, I believe I'm handing over to you for to give us some thoughts for this evening and to outline some of this in more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm just going to get that up. Can everybody see those slides that I've just popped up? If you give me the nod, Sandy, that would be great because I can only see your face at the moment. Great. OK, I'm going to get underway then. So, excuse me. Thank you, Teresa and Sandy. It's a real honour to be here presenting this 2023 Anna Craft Memorial Lecture. I want to say thank you to everyone for coming. I realise we're in different time zones, different sort of cruxing into people's evenings, etc. So I do really appreciate you all joining us today. I know in the audience we have all kinds of academic colleagues, but also some of Anna's friends and family. So welcome to everybody. I'm going to be wearing my heart on my sleeve in this lecture. Anna was not only a close colleague, but she was also a very close friend. Across the time we knew each other, formally, Anna was my PhD supervisor, my manager when I was a research fellow, and my academic colleague when I stepped into a lecturing role. But the longer I knew Anna, the more professional roles overlapped into friendship, and ultimately families that knew each other with great affection. This was instigated, I think, by Anna's open door approach to her own life and family. I remember having supervisions in the family house in Harpenden, having meetings at another family home in Queen's Terrace in Exeter. Her parents would often be around. Morris, her dad, planting flowers in window boxes. I should add that Morris is a retired professor himself, so his skills go well beyond planting flowers. He was always a rather daunting gardening presence for me as a young PhD student. Ella and Hugo, Anna's children, would trip in from school and stick their heads around the door for a quick update on their day. And before I had my own children, Anna and Simon put me up in their attic while I firstly commuted from London to Exeter to work at the university, and then again when Scott, my partner, and I house hunted so that we could move to Exeter. Anna's door was always open, both professionally and personally, and this brought me into affectionate relationship with her immediate and extended family, relationships which are still very dear to me now in Anna's absence. As often as we can organise it, I drink tea and eat cake with Alma, Anna's mum. I think for both of us, in very different ways, it taps us into our relationships with Anna and helps to keep her a lively part of our day-to-day existences. This lecture is also going to have something of a narrative tone. I need to tell you this story in order that you can understand how I arrived at the final focus of this lecture, the work that is currently taking place under the banner of the Creativity and Educational Futures Network at Exeter. I first met Anna at a researcher practitioner crossover conference in London. I'd read her books, Creativity Across the Primary Curriculum and Creativity and Early Years Education. At the time, I wasn't sure why they resonated so strongly. It was only later, reflecting on what we had in common, that I realised why I'd found such a kindred spirit. It transpired we'd both studied psychology, Anna combining her studies with philosophy and going on to work as an early years teacher. I had combined mine with physiology and follow-up study and work in arts and education. When I read Anna's work, I could see familiar patterns, or through lines, as she used to call them. They were patterns and threads that it was very easy for me to pick up and intertwine in my own ways of thinking. I was studying creativity in dance education at what is now called Trinity Laban Conservatoire. At the time, colleagues will have known it as Laban Centre London. I had started my preliminary studies and had a supervisor in-house. But when I read Anna's work, I knew I wanted to ask her to be a second supervisor from outside the institution. My work was a combination of the arts and social sciences. The former I had in abundance at Laban, especially through the brilliant involvement of Veronica Jobbins, who gave last year's memorial lecture. But the social sciences perspective was what I gained from Anna's involvement in my PhD. Although that makes it sound slight. What Anna brought to her supervision of my PhD is what she brought to everything she did. Her possibility thinking, her enthusiasm, and such sharp insight that I would often find myself sitting in supervision, scribbling as fast as I could to capture her words of wisdom. I went on from those supervisions to work as a research fellow alongside Anna in possibility thinking and creative partnerships research projects. It was during these projects that I was also privileged to work with Teresa Kremen and Pam Bernard. I could not have asked for a more intelligent, conscientious and caring group of mentors to start my academic career. Alongside this, I also worked as an RF with Anna at the Open University. I went on to become a research fellow in the CREATE research group at the University of Exeter, as Sandy said, and ultimately to gain a lecturing role in the School of Education there. It was when I was a senior lecturer that Anna and I developed the idea of WISE humanising creativity together, an idea I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We developed this concept because we felt there was a need for a way of conceptualising creativity in education which could counter issues of technological proliferation, issues of sustainability, environmental damage, education as the transmission of knowledge, and creativity as marketised. We co-developed WHC by combining Anna's WISE creativity theory and my humanising creativity theory. WISE creativity means that creativity is not value neutral and that wisdom and ethical judgment need to be considered as part of any creative process. Humanising creativity positions embodied dialogue as the creative driver, where through the interaction of creative process and identity, the maker engages in a humanising journey of becoming. At the heart of WHC was embodied dialogue. We theorised that this dialogue happens via conversations between the inside and the outside of the body, and provides transformative potential for new world views. This kind of dialogue is about embodied shared action, which happens individually, collaboratively, and communally. Through this generative embodied dialogue, Anna and I argued that creators are making and being made. They are on a journey of becoming, developing their identities as they develop creative ideas. By implication, this has an embedded ethical focus. And between 2011 and 2017, WHC was applied in a variety of research initiatives in the UK and Europe, including Create It and the See to Learn EU projects, the Siobhan Davis Next Choreography Dance project, and the Carousel Early Years project. But despite seeing it offer strong at-scale framework for creative teaching and learning, research and enactment, I found myself questioning it. And I also found myself questioning it without Anna around. It was during this period of WHC success that Anna died in 2014. Where we would have bounced ideas around and compared notes previously, I could only talk into the ether and imagine what her response might be to my doubts. But I held on to something that Anna said in one of the last meetings we had. She indicated that the future would not be about trying to solidify and protect her thinking, but about developing it and new conceptual ideas in relation to what the future might hold. When I look at this picture, I hear Anna saying, "Go on, you know what to do." And so I started to read and listen to new ideas that were emerging and to see what they meant for WHC. I started to engage with post-human writing, the likes of Rosie Braidotti and Karen Barad. I felt that the central tenet of WHC, embodied dialogue and becoming, resonated with post-human arguments such as Barad's, that we need to think of the world and everything in it as becoming through different fluid identities and subjectivities. They therefore remain core to my developing theorizing about creativity here. But post-human and new materialist ideas which encourage us to better consider other than human actants and to question the very nature of materiality led me to change and develop my theorizing about creativity in education. In 2018, I was able to pull these ideas together into this book chapter, from wise humanizing creativity to post-humanizing creativity. There are 4 fundamental points from post-human and new materialist thinking that I now work with in relation to conceptualizing creativity. Firstly, alongside humans, other living beings, objects, materials, and environments are equal actants. Next, that these intra-act with humans, meaning that we should actively consider and respond to the agencies of all different kinds of bodies. Thirdly, we are all intrinsically enmeshed in an embodied way, no matter our materiality. And lastly, that we need to shift from trying to extend human rights to other than humans, and to think about ethics more as an ethics of transformation, which encourages ethics to emerge from this enmeshing and interaction of human and other than human. Rather than stating that we should think about the wider system or environment as just context, new materialist theorists take a bolder step and argue that objects and environments are lively sources of action. This starts to shift us away from a socio-constructivist, humanly superior view, which also implies that particular humans are more superior or more human than others. And it pushes us to de-center humans and create space for others of all kinds to thrive. Alongside this decentering, Barad refers to what she calls intra-action, as opposed to interaction. For Barad, intra-action does not depend on pre-existing bound entities and really tries to incorporate those enmeshed agencies of all the different kinds of bodies that are involved. And within this enmeshing, for Barad, it's really important to see that things do not have inherently determinate boundaries. The boundaries between people and people, or people and objects, are not as clear-cut as we might think. And this means that the dominance of humans is also not clear-cut and needs to be questioned when we're thinking about creativities in practice. Barad also stresses that she is not letting go of being human, but that she sees humans as phenomena, or beings in their differential becomings, particular material reconfigurings of the world with shifting boundaries and properties, that stabilize and destabilize, along with specific material changes in what it means to be human. So really bringing to fore the fluidity. And for me, this suggests that who creates is a much less important question than how do we create. And by that, I mean we, in the broadest sense. So including other living beings, materials, environments, and objects in our understanding of creativity in education. Braidotti then states that there is an emerged sense of interconnection, an enlarged sense of interconnection, between self and others, including non-human or earth others. And it really requires us to reject a notion of self-centered individualism, which puts humans at the top of the pile all the time. Again, though, Braidotti is really clear that going beyond the human is not about dehumanizing. The concerns of all actants need to be part of our ethical judgments in creativity, rather than one group, the humans, dictating ethics for the collective. So, this kind of dialogic engagement sees humans and others engaging in a process of becoming through their interaction with each other. Each is changed and emerges differently through the interaction. In fact, everything is being made through that interaction. If we therefore define creativity in this way within education, we can see that I'm arguing that children are becoming in interaction with teachers, schools, the environment, ideas, and elements such as technology. And because of this, excitingly, I think there is the potential for the whole educational system to be changed through those children from the inside out through these embodied material dialogues. So I'm therefore arguing that post-humanizing creativity provides us with a greater chance of creatively living with the changes and challenges of technology, relationships, and sustainability. This is because it fully acknowledges the environment, technology, and other living beings as players in the creation of these challenges, and in turn sees them as active parts of the solutions to the problem rather than something to be done to by humans. Post-humanizing creativity therefore gives us a toolkit to respond wisely together to the wicked anthropocentric problems that we are all now facing. Since 2018, I've been really fortunate to have these ideas picked up by colleagues and funders and to put them into action in research initiatives. The first collaborative empirical article I wrote after the book chapter was with Lindsay Hetherington and other colleagues on the Creations Project working in primary and secondary EU education. Here, we were able to use post-humanizing creativity to develop teaching and learning in science and arts, or STEAM provision, as some of you may know it, across European education. We were able to forefront the importance of honouring students' flights of imagination with the other than human when exploring scientific questions, the role of real rather than hypothetical experiences for in-depth learning, the inclusion of teachers' and students' life experiences and curiosities, and the acknowledgement of the role of emotions, feeling, touch, and expression, questioning what it means to experience knowledge in and during creation with other than humans, rather than being told it. I was also very lucky to work on post-humanizing creativity with Katie Natanel and Heather Wren within higher education, within this project and article called Letting the Ghosts In. Here we were working to counter the neoliberalisation of UK higher education, to push back against speed and competition by focusing on embodiment, affect, ethicality, social justice, and political transformation. Anybody who knows Katie Natanel's teaching knows that it is already potent, situated as it is within the context of gender, sexuality, and violence in Palestine, Israel. Coupling her prior experience and our shared aspirations for change we were able to move on her module teaching to emphasize the pedagogies of caring and slowing down, to take the emphasis away from the word into images, embodied and oral learning, and to take the invitation to decenter traditional Western academic hierarchies, to acknowledge the unease and discomfort these can generate, and to work with them to develop more honest educational models in higher education. I was also invited to write about post-qualitative methodology in relation to creativity in this special issue. This allowed me the time and space for which I was very grateful to develop my understanding of the 4 methodological principles that I now work with. These are the ideas of practicing equivalence and experimentation, following Jasmine Ulmer, recasting new ways of knowing and researching, drawing on Carol Taylor, doing ethics differently through responsibility, in line with Barad, and always working very much in Anna's spirit to trouble our research thinking with curious care, following Donna Haraway. This has been particularly useful to me, given that there is not and never will be any kind of textbook for post-qualitative research. I now have a much clearer notion of how I am researching post-qualitatively, although as those working in the field will know that this is constantly shifting and developing across time. I have 3 more pieces of work currently in review, which bring the ideas into empirical research in higher education, schools-based research, and further STEAM work. But my current writing project is with keen colleagues. This is the research network that I lead at the University of Exeter. We all work around the idea of creativity and emergent education futures, with the aim of challenging the status quo in education. And despite our diversity, we are all doing work which argues for the centrality of difference and emergence, and really the necessity of researching education beyond boundaries. So through Keen, I am currently working on a book called Creative Ruptions for Emergent Educational Futures, with my co-editors Chris Turner and Heather Wren, alongside a raft of talented authors from all sorts of academic walks of life. The Creative Ruptions title, I hope, is one that Anna would have approved of. It's also the title that I have used for this lecture, as it represents the coalface, if you like, of my current thinking and collaborations in this area. The book is aiming to create meaningful and productive eruptions, disturbances or commotions in creativity and education practice and research. And it was really heartening today in the Bureau Creativity SIG seminar to hear that pulling through as one of the strong calls to action, that together we now need to really try to breach and rupture the systems that we are part of. In the book, we aim to offer direct educational responses to the daunting and unpredictable challenges that we all, human and other than human, now face. We offer insights into how ethical, careful educational futures might responsively emerge through the generative potential of creativity and its associated ruptions. The book will provide transdisciplinary examples of alternative educational futures for debate and provocation. Creativity and educational futures are understood from post-human, decolonial, new materialist and feminist perspectives. These are connected but different ways of conceptualizing and actualizing change in education to go beyond dominant Western approaches. Whilst the ideas draw inspiration from Anna's work, our thinking has now developed beyond those humanist socio-constructivist roots into new approaches, drawing on powerful paradigmatic shifts that have happened since Anna left us. And we hope and think this is what Anna would have wanted to see. The book covers educational settings from HE to community education in varied disciplines and transdisciplinary settings with a wide range of ages. What all chapters have in common is that they offer emergent alternatives to traditional, linear, logic-based, verbally centric, clearly Western educational models. The book has 3 thematic sections. In the first, creating spaces for ruptions, the chapters all consider how new ways of theorizing can create spaces for ruptions and change across education. This includes foci on such diverse ideas as embodiment, bewilderment, and liminal spatiality. The chapters in section 2, dialoguing, enter into more detailed dialogue between humans and other than humans. Here, chapters draw out the importance of environmental empathy, place-based learning through kinship, ethical and careful approaches to music making, which honour agency, and the political tensions of developing HE within challenging global environments. The final section, Resistings, offers chapters which actively resist existing structures, thinkings, and practices by challenging the status quo through combined theory-practice examples. This includes consideration of the African concept of utu to explore the aesthetics of life in music. It also includes decolonial practices of reflexivity for emancipation and care as a radical act of resistance in higher education, alongside the role of embodied ecological practices taught outside as a form of social justice and determination. The final chapter accumulates together all of the different ruptions from across the book. It sees power for change in creativity that works from the bottom up. It offers hope that there are new and different alternatives for our educational futures that are not reliant on dominantly Western rational thought systems. And it aims to emphasise that the power for change is in all of our hands, and that this can accumulate together to make a real difference in education. The book will be published open access in 2024. Please look out for it next year. We're looking forward to spreading our thinking and debating with you. And most importantly, we're looking forward to making change happen with our readers. In the summer of 2014, I had my very last work meeting with Anna in the hospice. It was genuinely the hardest work meeting I have ever had to attend. She said to me, "Don't be afraid to be the person standing to the side, saying something different." I am really proud to be working with my colleagues and saying something different in this new book. But increasingly, I don't want us to be saying this from the side. I want the alternatives in this book to become accessible to all kinds of people and to contribute to changing how we do education. Anna and I talked about the fact that sometimes we have to speak from the side, and sometimes we get the opportunity for our work to be centralised. Working with my book co-authors, from PhD students to practitioners to professors, with the support of, I hope, a changing political wind, I fully intend to give it our best shot to centralise these ideas and for them to create more appropriate educational futures. In the spirit of how Anna encouraged us all to work, I really hope to engage with as many of you as possible as we move these ideas forward together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerry. just wanted to say that was really inspiring, and the visuals to go with it were making me think too. So thank you very much for that. We have a little time for questions and issues that people would like to table. There's lots buzzing in my head. I've got about 5 pages of notes here, but there we are. I'll have to go back over that. Do colleagues have anything they would like to ask or comment on in relation to Kerry's Anna Craft Memorial Lecture? You did well to hold it together when you have to make connections to friends and that last friend and that last connection. Anybody in the room want to make a comment or ask a question? There are plenty of colleagues I know. Pam, I think it looks like she's about to, but perhaps not. Go for it if you do.
I can see Dan had a hand up.
Oh, good. Excellent.
And Naomi.
I can't. Naomi, can we invite you first and then we'll move on to others? I couldn't see everybody.
Hi, I'm Anna's sister, and I just wanted to say very briefly that I wanted to thank for pulling Anna through, as she would have said, for pulling Anna through into the meeting. So thank you very much. It was very moving and very interesting, and I can picture those conversations in Harpenden over the table, and yeah, really inspiring. I work in medicine, and my daughter, who's also on the line, is a theatre director, and I can see lots of parallels in the work that you're doing. So thank you very much. It's very interesting.
Thanks, Naomi. It's really amazing to have a lot of the family members here that kind of recognise as well. So thank you for coming, and great as well that it can have resonance in different fields as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wanting to make a contribution? Pam, I think you're about to.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Thank you. As you can see, I have Anna's photo here, which is always on my desk, and she's always present in our thinking. And thank you for reminding us of the many through lines that continue like leitmotifs throughout our thinking, with Anna present every day. My question to you really is around how might post-humanizing creativity apply to the fostering of children's possibility thinking, knowing that Anna wrote so much, we did so much work together on the progression of possibility thinking, how it looks across Key Stage 1, 2, and into secondary school. What might post-humanizing creativities contribute to the fostering of children's possibility thinking in 2023 and beyond for future making education?
I think that question, Pam, really nicely picks up on some of the debates we were having in the seminar earlier, as Dan Harris, who's also with us still here, commented on it. I think Anna was talking, I forget which publication, but talking about the notion of why sustainable creativities and really kind of pulling those to the fore. And I think there are a lot of, not surprisingly, a lot of the seeds of what I'm talking about in that early work that we all did with Anna, particularly around possibility thinking and the point of asking what if about the world. One of the conversations I was having recently, and I think is such a strong part of Anna's work, comes from her early years perspective on the world. And I think there is so much that we can learn from even pre-verbal children about their embodied engagement and the way that they just engage with the world in a way that we almost can't remember. And I think listening to them from what you might call their post-human perspective, they're not quite in that kind of verbalizing place, and we do them an injustice a lot, I think. And I know Anna was very keen to put their perspective forward in the world, but that idea that comes through in post-humanism, that we need to move beyond the word, we need to move beyond having the humans as the central premise, and really allowing children sometimes to show us. Joanna Hayes talks about children being already able, and we kind of often discredit them for that. And I think really making sure that we see their perspective and allow them to lead the way, of sort of decentering adults as much as decentering humans, I think is a very strong strand of how that post-human work can go forward and engage both with the environment and some of the technologies that we're now dealing with, I think.
Thank you, Kerry. It's a good reminder, isn't it, of the young's multiple layers of capacity and communicative capacity, and it's not words yet, but they're still communicating and we're still understanding. Dan Harris, over to you for a question, please.
Yes, thanks. Carrie, I just want to thank you for the talk. It was very moving and just really inspiring in the way that you were able to combine your personal reflections on Anna and her mentorship and friendship with these, really generative theoretical ideas. And I never met Anna, but I was very inspired by her immediately in my PhD studies as soon as I picked up her work and I started corresponding with her. And when I got my first funding in 2014, asked her if I could come and visit her and learn from her and debate about some of these ideas that you've mentioned today. And she was so generous and kind. I mean, she didn't know me, but she just said, "Oh, that would be great. I just have to go to the hospital for a bit, but maybe after that, it would be great, And then heard that she had passed and was so shocked and bereft at not being able to meet her, but also just her generosity of, sort of downplaying her situation, to keep encouraging me as a scholar. I guess my question is around the post-human. I've been similarly inspired by watching your work evolve around the post-human. And I'm wondering if you think it provides a kind of, like, it sounds like your new book sort of goes into this territory, but I'm wondering if you think it provides a kind of opening into some transdisciplinary or cross-curricular and school context approach to integrating creativity with, environmental education, for example, which is doing such innovative kind of work, both in research and in schools these days.
Yeah, I think thanks, Dan. I think the transdisciplinary approach, and for those that don't work in the area, I would define that as a way of putting education together that puts the issue, the problem that we're dealing with at the centre, and the disciplines are coming together to try to respond to that problem. And absolutely, I think the notion that the post-human allows us, it opens the door, as you're kind of saying, into that transdisciplinary pedagogy. And we mustn't forget, if we go back to the 60s and 70s in the UK, that notion of what we would have called cross-curricular education at that time, these ideas have kind of ebbed and flowed across the ages. I know Maurice, Anna's dad, was very much a sort of working presence in the field when some of these ideas were coming through, and he's probably nodding and saying, yes, we've seen some of this before, yes. And now it's trying to take the best of the current understanding, and these are the sorts of conversations I have in my head with Anna, and saying, right, we've had this before, how can we take this next wave of interest, this next wave of sort of a different way of seeing this, and really try to kind of capitalize on what the post-human brings. And I think because we sadly have both the AI issues and the climate crisis issues in front of us, we have to respond to those. We have to stop with this industrialized Victorian model of education. Again, in the SIG seminar, you put forward the call to arms. We just need to redo curricula. Imagine if we redid curricula in a transdisciplinary way that put these problems at the heart of education. How much more quickly would young people leading the way really be able to respond to the problems that we're all facing? And I think, transdisciplinarity and the post-human turn, if they can sort of symbiotically catalyze us, they could really propel us into some sort of great new territory in education. I really do.
Thank you, Kerry. I can see another hand up. I think it's Simon and Ella, so please, over to you.
Hey, Ella.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for such engaging lecture, but also and like really heartfelt offering. I was really inspired by your capacity to bring your personal memories of Anna, who was my mum, together with such like meaningful thoughts about what work she was doing in the past, but also how you've taken that on today. And I was really excited to see ideas that I explored at university, from which I only graduated 2 years ago, being part of like what you're working on now and how that intersects with Mum. And I always wish that I could talk to her about ideas, but this is a really nice opportunity for that. And I have a question, which is in response to what you, I think, were indicating in the middle of what you said about posthumanism, allowing learners to be an embodied presence that initiates dialogic like happenings and learnings without them necessarily even being aware of it, or that's how I heard that idea. And I'm curious to know how it might be useful for learners who are older and potentially quite cerebrally molded into an unhelpful way of learning, or like a more rigid way of learning, to like be made aware of how their embodied presence is also in the room, and whether that's part of the thinking.
Absolutely part of the thinking. I should start by saying, Ella, your mum would be super proud of that question. As a starter, you've hit the nail on the head, so to speak. And I think that realization that for many of us, that embodied presence, it's something we are all living and engaged in every day, and yet we can forget about it. And I think one of my chapter in the book is about embodiment, and it's about how we can work with touch and time, even in the smallest instances. So, for example, something I do with a lecture theatre of 80 students is to get them to work in an embodied way, to stand up out of their seats, to touch palms, to touch the wall, to touch the space, to find ways, to find that connection. And they're horrified when we start doing that work, I'm really honest. And yet they walk out of that lecture theatre, hopefully having had a very different experience, and just that remembering that we've all got this in us. And one of the things that I ask in the chapter in the book is just to say, what is your embodied thing? What do you remember? It might be riding a horse, it might be playing football, it might be anything on that list that you can tap back into and say, what can I bring of that into my pedagogy, into my engagement with learners? If you're a learner, how can you bring that into the classroom? And to tap back into, as you say, a kind of almost unconscious awareness that we all have this in us, and we can all use it as part of making the changes we want to see happen, is really important, I think.
That's really great to hear, really useful things to know.
Thanks
you.
Thank you, Ella. Anybody else got a question? I can't see any more hands up at the minute.
I'm not sure how to get my hand up correctly, but if I can just say that my name's David Abrahamson, and my mother and Alma's mother were sisters, and I'm getting on a bit, so I've made a total hash of joining, but I only just got in time for the discussion now, but even listening to the discussion is interesting for me, because I'm a retired psychiatrist, and I think some of the ideas which I've picked up in the discussion relate to concerns to do with psychiatric patients who have what are termed delusional ideas, because in exploring them, and the term rupture is used in psychotherapy as well, they give information about human beings, not about what's sometimes called artificial intelligence. It's information about human beings and the workings of the brain. As I didn't hear it all, I may have got it wrong, but I'd like to just make that point, as it seems to me that it's giving us information about the human mind and the way it works, and the very subtle ways in which things can be distorted, which is another great value to the work which Anna did.
Thank you, David. I would absolutely agree with that. And I think there's some really interesting work coming through in mental health practice currently. One of the authors in our book, Ursula Crickmay, who is with us today, has looked at how we can understand early onset dementia from a post-human perspective, and really pushing back against that idea of these sorts of conditions as deficit. And it goes back to that idea that I was talking about, that I think post-humanism not only helps us to decenter the humans per se, but it can also help us to decenter the sort of notion of the normative, of the dominantly central view of what it is to be a normal human being. And actually, by opening up the space to understand perspectives from dementia, from psychiatric patients, from young children, all of those different marginalized perspectives can really be looked at to offer different insight and different ways of being and knowing in the world. So I think you're picking up on a very kind of strong point that was sort of, as she called it, a through line in Anna's work. But I think it's a strong sort of thrust of the post-human, that it helps us to really spotlight beyond a Western normal headset, and particularly include things as well like Indigenous ways of knowing, which we've, again, in the Western academia, have forgotten that kind of connection, and making sure we honour that knowledge rather than kind of trying to own it and colonise it again, really bring that Indigenous view through in its own right, and allow space for that. And I'm aware that in saying that, I am using the word allow, because there is a Western academia that has to find ways to ally with Indigenous peoples and to bring their work through. Because if we leave it to happen of its own accord, I fear it won't happen because of the structures of Western academia and that Western dominant rational mindset. So there are many challenges around that, I think, but stuff that increasingly people are aware of and looking to turn on their head, I think. So thanks. I think it's a really pertinent point.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Wendy's got a question. Wendy, please do a voice.
Yeah, hi. Not really a question, just say thank you, thank you for inviting me, Alma, inviting me to this very moving and inspiring annual event. I really loved the slide you had with the two sparklers there, one igniting the other. I mean, that's a wonderful idea, wonderful. That was Anna, right? Inspiring others to continue the work. I have one anecdote, not really an anecdote. Back in 2000, I was doing my master's thesis in Israel, but through the University of London Institute of Education. And when I was in England, because we had to come to England for a few weeks in the summer, which was fun, I interviewed Anna to give me some insight into the British education system. And I'll always remember that. It wasn't, we weren't talking about creativity, all these sort of things, but they were always there in the background. I was a teacher for many, many, many years, teaching English as a foreign language in Israel. I am Anna's first cousin. Alma and Morris are my aunt and uncle, very dearly cherished relatives. And it was just great to be able to connect with everybody here. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks,
Wendy. Thank you, Wendy. That's really good to hear. I think we don't have any other questions now. Kerry, is there anything you wanted to finish by saying? I've got a couple of final comments, but I'll leave the space to you in case you wanted to summarize something or say, repeat yourself in some way.
No, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. It's been a real honour for me to be able to mark my friendship and professional relationship with Anna through this lecture, and I'm just very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
I just want to say, as another friend that I know, she would be not only proud of her daughters, questions, but proud of your presentation too, and the way that you have taken this space on. So as she used to say, let's go for a big glass of wine. BGOW is what you're allowed now, which is the common piece. Might I invite colleagues who are here to either take their mics off just to give Kerry a proper human round of applause, an embodied round of applause rather than simply a silent one. And lots of people saying thank you very much and fantastic talk in the chat line. You've created all sorts of options for us to now go and discuss with other people. And we look forward to the book coming out so that that kind of conversation can be pushed further on and take more consequence as we go forward as educators. And we look forward also, I hope, to a series of seminars or some other kind of opportunities in which those opportunities will be made available. It just leaves me to thank Vera for hosting us for this and to make it clear to everybody that the recording will be available both online at the University of Exeter and online at the Open University, the universities that Anna worked in when she passed. So thank you, Kerry, again. Have a good evening, everybody.